Hi, I'm Em, and this is Fang Farrier. Today, we're talking complaints. As long as we have patients, we'll have complaints. It's just part of dentistry. It's part of the job. We can't meet everyone's expectations. We can't reliably predict everyone's expectations. And ultimately, it's not meeting these or a miscommunication that quite often leads to complaint. And it's a huge source of stress. Complaints can be stressful in any profession, but quite often as a dentist, or indeed any dental professional, the complaint is directed against you and your work, not the practice, not the team, not the corporate if you work for one. It's against you, and you alone are accountable for it to your professional body. So it's something, or complaints are often kind of cited when discussing burnout and depression, even when talked about in cases of suicide. It's a huge stress event in an already stressful profession, and sometimes it can just be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Now, there's a lot of fear around complaints because of that. So part of that is our mindset around them. And hopefully one of the things that you take away from today is we shouldn't be afraid of complaints. It's hard because the mindset we have is that complaints are a failure and failure is incompetence, which has these huge consequences, real or imagined, and certainly take a disproportionately long time to resolve when you think about the amount of time it took for the events that resulted in the complaint. Sometimes it can be months, if not years, before these things are fully put to bed, whether the complainant had a case or not, whether the dentist was found negligent or not. And that's a lot of time to be losing nights of sleep, to be mulling over things, trying to solve problems that can't be solved because you can't control most of the factors at play. So, dentistry is hard enough without worrying about every outcome of every treatment we do and being judged. And maybe part of this is that it's such a disproportionate scale from events that happen to potential events and consequences if found guilty of these things, or these things are found to be true. From loss of registration, meaning unable to work as a dentist. And most of us, if we've a side hustle, it's just that. Most of us don't have anything to do other than dentistry, or certainly can't immediately roll into something. There's a loss of money, not just in terms of kind of paying things out and lawyers' fees, but loss of time in the office, loss of reputation, loss of future and present patients, and probably a loss of drive, because we don't go around trying to invoke complaints. It's very hard to emotionally take and not be upset by the thought that patients don't think we're trying to do our best, because that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to help, and we're trying to do the best with what we've got at the time. And that's part of the problem too, is that what we have at the time isn't necessarily what's reflected in notes and records or accounts that are given maybe years later. Is at the time, it may be the skill set available to us and our experience. It may be pressure from a patient to perform treatment that we think is less ideal. even though we're consenting for it as best we can, and we feel that that's what the patient is wanting, a less than desirable outcome can soon swing that round to something I never wanted and the dentist should have known better. There's what I call textbook dentistry and ideal outcomes, which are great in a patient that's very cooperative, that doesn't have an excessively salivary mouth and need to swallow every 2 seconds, that doesn't have cheeks that pour round mirrors as you try to retract them, tongues that would wrestle an elephant's trunk. It's not necessarily done under those ideal conditions, and part of our skill set and part of what we can manage to do is negotiate that most of the time. We're working with things that can cut through those soft tissues like a warm knife through butter, yet most of the time we're managing to avoid all sorts of hazardous outcomes. And it's hard to feel that you're being judged on an outcome when not necessarily everybody appreciates the conditions you were working under. And that's kind of where sometimes we have to be careful what we're saying about colleagues' work, because we don't necessarily know what the conditions were like on the day. And it's very easy to cast judgment on work that you see in a patient that you haven't worked on, or that may have changed considerably in how cooperative or challenging they are to treat, because they've presented to somebody else as that nervous patient that can't keep still, that has to keep sitting up, that provides all the difficulties for treatment. And through that course of treatment, they've transformed into someone that's less challenging to work on and much easier to produce an ideal outcome. Or it may have been that there was kind of raging perio and gingivitis when they first started, and that's all under control now. So when you look at that mouth and you think, how could that have happened in this mouth? Well, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 months ago, that may have been something very, very different. But not all bad dentistry gets complained about. Not all, I kind of want to do air quotes around bad dentistry, is a problem. You think of the things you've seen that are less than ideal, that go the distance, don't cause any problems, and have quite a decent kind of longevity. And complaints don't mean you're a bad dentist. We deal with people, and people in any profession, any walk of life, have a right to complain, have a right to be heard about complaints. And a lot of it comes down to, regardless in where these complaints are arising from, is that wanting to be seen, to be heard, to be understood, to be acknowledged, and sometimes just apologised to. So don't think the worst of complaints. Don't think the worst of your colleagues who've had complaints. And don't try your hardest to avoid them, because avoiding complaints through things like avoiding procedures that haven't gone wrong, that haven't gone well before, or over consenting to feel like you're covering your back, are very defensive kind of dental techniques. But unfortunately, they kind of restrict you from offering a full range of treatment and probably guide you down a different path than if you actually developed a decent relationship with the patient and understood what it is you're trying to achieve together, rather than not putting things on the table or trying to make them sound so terrible because you've had your fingers burnt in the past. But a dissatisfied patient doesn't always complain. Think about the times you've had service somewhere that you haven't enjoyed, or you didn't like, or wasn't to your satisfaction. Most of us want to avoid that uncomfortable discussion, that uncomfortable encounter, and we just won't go back. We'll tell everyone we know that we wouldn't recommend them go there, but we often wouldn't go back. And also, I think with dental things, it's a very personal thing, and dental disease and decay and needing your teeth fixed carries a lot of shame and embarrassment with it. And unfortunately, that will stop people with genuine concerns coming forwards. And I say unfortunately because, yes, no, we don't need that kind of stress incident in terms of a complaint. But as I said about the not being afraid of complaints, is that it's this feedback, and when things go wrong is how we learn and how we move forward and how we become better clinicians. And it would be easy to just look at the stuff that goes well and pat ourselves on the back for what a great job we're doing. And we probably are most of the time, but it's those things where we slip up where we probably learn the most. And it might not be the most about our abilities, our techniques, but it might actually just be that part of the interaction and our listening skills and our understanding and picking up those warning cues that you're not on the same page, and that maybe you're proceeding with treatment that means something to you but something else to the patient, and trying to kind of foresee common pitfalls. And again, this doesn't mean over-consenting and throwing more and more pieces of paper at it. This just means really listening to your patients and making sure that the stories they're telling you over a number of appointments fit in with the overall picture of what you're doing. That there aren't cues or clues that, whilst they think that this is the direction they want, that ultimately it's something that isn't as big a priority as together we've made it, or something that's pushing them to the limits of their finances and will therefore have bigger repercussions if there are problems with it. So there's all these sorts of things. And it comes down to communication. It was one of the things, I mean, I'm always talking about things that weren't discussed at dental school, but the dental protection societies were pretty good at coming into dental schools and talking to us about complaints, how likely we were to have our first serious complaint within, the first, I'll say X years, because it was probably a lot longer when I was at dental school than it is now, and how most of the complaints were down to poor communication or how the patient had been made to feel. And there's a quote I always think of, which is from Maya Angelou, which is, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel or made them feel. And I think that's so true within dentistry. A patient, as we would as patients in other fields, will not necessarily forget what you said, but selectively remember what was said to suit how the picture kind of falls at the end of the day. They may forget what you did in terms of where you've come from the beginning of their treatment to the end, but if you made them feel like they weren't important, like you were rushing, like they hadn't picked the better treatment plan, so you're not paying them as much attention, if they're feeling like they're having issues, be it pain or high spots or things further down the road, and that they're not being acknowledged or given the same detail they were when they were paying for higher end treatment, then all of these things get remembered, and all of these things tend to provoke a complaint more readily. So, as I say, it's not always bad dentistry. And I was reading a publication from Dental Protection in the UK, and they say that a significant majority of the complainants and episodes of litigation experienced by members of Dental Protection display some evidence of interpersonal relationship between patient, some evidence of breakdown, of interpersonal relationship between patient and dental professional. So again, communication. And I've seen it in my own patients where things have either led to complaints or have headed in that direction, is that because there's so much anxiety around dentistry. There's so much awareness of the costs, and it is so expensive compared to a lot of subsidized medical treatments and various other things, is that when they find a dentist that they can trust and they feel they've made real progress, if things don't start to go the way they were expecting, they can feel exponentially let down compared to not having that trust, because that's what they'd always thought of dentists. And I find that a lot of patients that have that real kind of deep-seated fear and issues around that, there's often other accompanying things going on at home or around them that are aggravating these situations, and things that are beyond your control. And that could be as much as the family member or the mate goading them on at home about how they didn't have such an experience and that sounds wrong. And from that kind of side of things to actually just massive amounts of stress in their life, that this is just another thing that they don't need happening. And we're going to see a lot of that with COVID, because a lot of people are having some awful stresses, financial included, and we're going to start seeing that reflected in what's going on in the dental surgery. But I mean, I can remember times when I, as a consumer, so my children are all quite close together, and I can remember when my middle child was just a baby and my older one wasn't an awful lot older, and going in and having some problem with like the car seat or something like that. And I can remember just melting down and nutting off at one of the staff one day. And it wasn't, yes, there was something wrong with the car seat I'd just bought, but it was the frustration of everything. I was, low income at the time because I wasn't earning, and we don't get paid much in terms of maternity leave here in New Zealand. I was overtired because I'd got 2 babies essentially at home, kind of keeping me up all the time. And the frustration of just feeling like it was one more thing I had to deal with, and that I wasn't being taken seriously, was enough for me to just kind of nut off, which is out of character. And again, I didn't complain. In fact, I was probably more in the wrong than the poor lady that was dealing with me. But I tell you what, I was as embarrassed as hell. So that again, a complaint that went to nothing, because when I'd calmed down and those emotions had passed, I was like, oh, actually, I'm just a bit embarrassed about how that went. I didn't go back to that shop, not because of the bad service. I was just embarrassed about my behaviour. And we'll see things like that in dentistry too, because there's a lot of fear and anxiety, which does bring out weird and strange behaviour in people, and not so much, I don't think of it necessarily in terms of complaints, but we'll all have those patients that when they first came in, they seemed incredibly rude and incredibly short, and you thought, how am I ever going to get through to this patient? But actually the second appointment, the third appointment, the fourth appointment, they got gradually better and better, and part of that was that fear and anxiety and all the hype around coming in for the first appointment, that they were defensively on edge and unable to operate in a normal kind of way, and with the same kind of rational, unemotional behaviour that they had at those first appointments. So that relationship that we build with patients is really important. And the reason I'd kind of done complaints first, because I was going to talk about patient-centred treatment planning, is that I wanted to give a bit of background as to why it's so important that we're really getting to know our patients over that treatment planning process. Not just the clinical side of things, but in terms of kind of where things sit at home, who else is involved in decision making, what it is they actually want from treatment, not necessarily what we think is kind of gold standard treatment, what is the problem they're trying to fix. Because when these expectations are thought to be aligned at that appointment, but then are unmet at the end of the treatment plan, that's where we tend to run into problems. That said, there's literature to support the concept that a patient's decision to take something further has often been made before the incident that gives rise to it. So again, it's that first impressions and how those early appointments go on as to whether the patient is going to be primed to making a complaint. Are they waiting for you to slip up? Are they waiting for the time that they feel rushed, or that you ran late, or that the charging wasn't right, or there was some equipment issue, or just waiting for something to kind of go at? And some of that may have nothing to do with you and to do with past experiences. So it is difficult. So it's a minefield. And when you look at it like this, you wonder, it's a miracle more people don't complain. But, let's not invite that either. We've seen what happens when you put out a full page ad in the broadsheets inviting complaints. It doesn't end well. So no. But yeah, it's a lot of people that have had clinical or cases of adverse outcomes with clinical negligence. A lot of people aren't complaining or in the States suing. So yeah, it's coming down to other things, and a lot of that is communication. In the same publication that I was reading from Dental Protection, they were talking about who has lower claims experience, and that's longer appointments, not meaning just having longer appointments in the book and doing more in them, but giving more time for patients. So again, that's addressing that not feeling that they've been rushed, or that their time isn't valuable, or I guess it kind of lends itself to if something's been rushed and they feel they've been squeezed in, that they then feel overcharged for the time that was involved. And I had not a complaint, but a lady that I saw through one of my pregnancies and saw for many years later, but she always mentioned the time when I was pregnant and I'd seen her, and I would have been tired and over the day, and I would have been trying my best to just do exactly what I do with every other patient, but they can see it in your body language and your demeanour and how the day's going. It's that she remembers that it felt rushed, and she reminded me at every appointment I ever saw her at, again, that time that you rushed. Oh, those were the fillings that time that you rushed. So they remember stuff like that, as would you if it was you on the other side of the equation. But again, lower claims experienced by those that know their patients better. So not necessarily like know them, go round for tea, know them, but know them as in know a lot more of their background, and when asked about them can give you a lot more social history as well as medical history and treatment history. Lower claims experience for those with active listening skills, and I'm going to come back to that in another podcast, because again that comes down to I want to break that down further, because listening isn't always listening, and we're not always listening for the right things. But yeah, active listening skills and being warm and friendly. Now, like so many of these things, warm and friendly means something to somebody and something else to the next person, because there are lots of people out there that not that dentistry isn't a profession, but view it as kind of the old Victorian professional kind of look, and that warmth isn't part of a dentist-patient interaction. There are some people that just doesn't come naturally to, and if tried to force, it feels weird and strange. And this is where I would say is that you will find patients that suit you best and will probably gravitate to you more, are those that like your personality, your manner, whether it be warm or friendly, or whether you're just kind of clinical and down to the point. Also on this list is that those that are kind of humorous and with a warmer personality, a lower claim experience. But there's humor and there's humor. Some patients won't appreciate any humor, and some will find it quite a relief and stress relieving. So each to their own. These are general findings, but again, they're not for everyone. But also on the list is being respectful of a patient's time. So not running late, not rushing, or not leading them to believe that the appointment has been rushed. Being available. This one makes me cringe. I don't like talking to patients on the phone if I don't have to. I think that it's not a great method of communication. I think there's far more room for error in terms of one person's talking about one thing and the other is talking about something completely different, and that it's not easily recorded or witnessed. Or I would prefer that people come in for a no-charge consult and we sit down and talk about it face-to-face, where I've got their notes and their x-rays and their photos in front of me and we can talk through it together. Not always a comfortable time, but that's to me is being available. But I've had patients that have got quite upset that I don't call them back. And I just think, it's not something that I like to do. And I'm sure there'll be those that will criticise me for it, but it's I have a bit of a phone phobia, I guess. But yeah, those at high risk complaints, kind of same document, talking about rudeness, delays, inattentiveness, miscommunication, apathy, lack of cleanliness. I don't know whether that's the dentist or the practice, but either, I guess, which is pretty shocking. And minor system errors. And this is where I think you forget sometimes that it's not one of these things or doing all of them, but sometimes for that one patient, it can just be a series of things clocking up. So it might be the second time you've run late. When they come in, it may be that you're having equipment issues, or you've got a new nurse that you don't work with very well, so everything's not running as smoothly, or you're having difficulty with one of the materials, or you change tack halfway through and they might not see that as kind of problem solving, but there was a problem there and they've got second rate treatment. So again, it kind of comes down to communication, getting your systems all in order, but some of those things, it's just a bit of a perfect storm. You could be doing all of the right things for 99.9% of the patients, but it's always the same patient, isn't it? Always the one that you go, I mustn't run late for this one, and then something happens. Oh, this is the one that such and such didn't work, and everything goes wrong for them. They're always the ones with the high spots. They're always the ones with the dry socket. Everything just goes wrong for them. But yeah, communication, and I'll get back to this again. We get told about communication, but the emphasis tends to be on our verbal and written communication solely to the patient. And I think the big oversight here is the non-verbal communication and the active listening side of it from both sides, but also the whole team. So we're not just talking patient to dentist and dentist to patient. We're talking dentist to dental team to dentist, dental team to patient, patient to dental team. Your advertising in terms of what expectations you're setting for patients before they've even come in through the door. Do you know who you're advertising for, or what effect trying to be the cheapest in town might have? And then there's dentists to and about other dentists or dental health professionals, is how we talk about dentistry and other dentists or other treatment or the likes of our therapists and our hygienists and our nurses matters, because it might seem that we make ourselves sound better by pointing out work that could have been done differently. But if we're doing it in a kind of, for want of a better word, they're shit and I'm great kind of a way, it just brings the whole profession down, and it puts distrust in the patient in all dentists. They don't suddenly think that, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky, I've just found the best dentist in the whole world and all the rest of them are rubbish. They think, what is going on? Dentistry is a farce. So we have to be kind of careful how we talk about these things. And I know that, we've had kind of campaigns encouraging whistleblowing, and I'm not saying that we should let serious neglect or bad treatment go unnoticed, but remember those patients that it didn't work out for you when you've done treatment that you see at the next checkup or years later, and you think, oh gosh, I wish I could have done a better job than that. But it was all those things that played into that appointment that led to that result. And I always tell patients, because quite often it comes up with things like open contact points, overhangs, short root canals, stuff, different kind of crown margins or or things that may have been kind of kept an eye on for a while, is you don't suddenly go and say, this is wrong and that's been done. As I'll explain, is that yes, I think we can probably get a better result there, but there's equally as good a chance that I'm going to run into exactly the same difficulties that your last dentist did, who also probably thought they were going to do a better job than this. So it comes down to that. It's not just self-compassion, but compassion for our colleagues, because overall, if we can improve patients' perception of dentistry, we are going to lower the overall risk of complaints. If we are promoting the idea that there are bad dentists out there that shouldn't be treating, or that they shouldn't be here for this, or that was done wrong, then it can go pretty sour pretty quick. But as I say, I've kind of gone over what I wanted to say. I'm going to follow this up with something that's a bit more on communication and patient-centered treatment planning, and that massive importance of non-verbal skills, and probably most so with that, and this isn't that we all suddenly have to become body language experts, but is recognizing when the body language isn't matching up with what they're saying. And that, for most of us, is just a gut instinct that something is wrong. And I've looked back at patients where I've had complaints from things that I hadn't necessarily anticipated, but more often than not, I'll go in and there'll be reams and reams of notes on these patients, because at that first appointment, or at the appointment, things were going on. You just get that spidey sense, the hairs go up on the back of your neck. You just get the idea that this is going to come back and bite you. All right, well, I'm going to leave it there because I've gone over what I wanted to do, but look after yourselves. Don't be afraid of complaints. Learn from them. Try and give yourself a bit of space between the initial emotional reaction to them and how you're dealing with them, and try to put them to one side as best you can, because they can be lengthy to resolve. All right, take care of yourselves. As always, if you want to continue the conversation on Twitter, I'm at Fang_Farrier, or on Facebook in my group Fang Farriers. All right, take care. Bye.